Thank you, Babu. And I think we've had a very rich panel till now. And Babu's initial question was: is it possible to fight for trans rights without fighting fascism? Anindya, I thought, did a very beautiful presentation, which really documented, to my mind, how sections or aspects of the trans movement have become colonized by certain kind of authoritarian politics. And but I thought what Anindya is also the point Anindya is also making is that takeover is not complete by all the incidents Anindya narrated. Anindya also spoke about the way there's a certain kind of resistance to this authoritarian politics, and I think that resistance is clearly embodied in the range of people we see in this conference itself. And thanks to VQ again for really complicating the narrative in many ways and for putting forward the idea that there is more to trans than being merely trans. And that we can't see the world purely in terms of the lens of transphobia, because we do that, we do injustice to the rich lives of trans people themselves. And I want to speak here in terms of what I wanted to call, I changed the topic completely. I said what's my place to talk about intersectionality and trans politics. Instead, I said I'll speak about a trans inspiration for a queer politics, speaking as I think a queer ally of the trans movement. And for me, the moment of inspiration, the many moments of inspiration, I think many moments of inspiration, many people of inspiration in this room itself. But I want to take us a little outside this room, little outside this context, to a slightly different place. To ask the question that when we talk about queer politics, what I'm trying to put forward is the idea that we must have a capacity for radical kinship, and that we must go beyond the sphere of LGBT politics and have the ability to encompass unlikely affinities with foreigners, outcasts, outsiders. And to my mind, no person really embodies this better than a figure from the United States, someone who all of you know, someone called Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning, for those of you who don't know, was an information analyst with the US Army, and she did something very remarkable. As a young person, I think 26 or 27 years old, she released the details of the war on Iraq, the war on Afghanistan, and diplomatic cables to Julian Assange, which was the famous WikiLeaks case. And why that was important again is we look at the record, what it indicates is that if you're looking at the Arab Spring, the reason the Arab Spring began is because the corruption of the Ben Ali regime in Tunisia was exposed. Why was the corruption of the Ben Ali regime in Tunisia exposed? It was exposed because Chelsea Manning had released these cables which spoke really about the kind of corruption of the Ben Ali regime. Of course, if you go against the most powerful country in the world, it's not going to be easy. And it wasn't easy for Chelsea Manning because she was arrested. She was confined in solitary detention for a long period of time. She spent over 9 months in prison, being tortured and being subjected to pre-trial detention. She was finally convicted and sentenced to 35 years in jail for violation of the Espionage Act. And I think the question which came to my mind is, why did she choose to go against the most powerful country in the world? Why did she choose to become a whistleblower in that sense? And it's interesting, you go back to her statements in the trial, she makes a very interesting point. She makes a very moving point. She speaks about in particular the Iraq war, and she speaks about the way the US military really engaged with Iraqis. And the language, in a sense, I'll just read out to you what she says. She says when the US military was engaging, the language they were using was this. They dehumanized the individuals they were engaging meaning shooting, and seemed to not value human life, and referred to them as quote-unquote dead bastards, and congratulated each other on their ability to kill in large numbers. At one point in the video, an individual attempts to crawl to safety. The person is injured, and the crew members ask for the wounded person to pick up a weapon so they can have a reason to engage, which is to shoot him. And again, this again is a story which, if you're working in the US military, I'm sure these stories come up again and again, and many people let it go, they ignore it as it were. But for whatever reason, Chelsea Manning was unable to let that go, and it defined the way she saw it. And she said, I need to oppose this, or it's something which I have a problem with. And what does that tell us about her? It tells us that there's somewhere what you'd call a certain sense of, I would call it a certain kind of radical empathy, where she's able to establish a sense of kinship with people who are very distant in geographical and cultural terms. And she's able to take what you'd call a very heroic stand against neo-colonialism. She wants to expose its brutal face, and she's in a sense what you'd call a dissenter in the best senses of the term. And I think this is important only for one reason, or one very important reason, which is I think in the contemporary world that we live in, there's an impulse for all of us to retreat into the private and the personal. And the reason we want to retreat into the private and the personal is because the world outside is so difficult to really to deal with. That in a sense, if you want to engage with the world, you want to change the world, it's not easy. So many people feel that, the best thing to do is let's just focus on my private and my personal life, and maybe that's the best way to deal with the complexities of the world that we live in. But that's not the path Chelsea Manning took forward. The other part of it, which I want to just talk about in terms of which is also part of Chelsea Manning's life, is on the last day of the trial, the day when the judgment is being given, she also comes out as being transgender. She says, as I transition to the next phase of my life, I want everyone to know the real me. I'm Chelsea Manning. I'm a female. Given the way that I feel and have felt since childhood, I want to begin hormone therapy as soon as possible. So what is this journey? Is as much a journey outside in terms of how you empathize with a wider section of humanity, as it is a journey inward in terms of Chelsea Manning discovering who she is as she transitions from a soldier called Bradley Manning to someone called Chelsea Manning. So you see the sense that, again, VQ's reference to the idea of freedom. What is the notion of freedom? The notion of freedom, as far as Chelsea Manning is concerned, is the freedom to live in the gender of one's choice. It's equally the freedom to live free from the wars of the deep state. And this story, in a sense, to me, was a remarkable story, and for which she was sentenced, as I said, to 35 years in jail. And maybe President Obama, in one of his few good deeds, commuted a sentence, and for 7 years imprisonment. And you'd imagine that you've been through 7 years of imprisonment. You're done with this. You've paid your debts, in a sense, to working on these issues which matter to you, and that will be the end of the story. But what happens post that is the trial of Julian Assange is underway, and a grand jury in the United States is summoned, and she's asked to appear before the jury. She says that she will not appear before the jury. She says, we've seen this power of the jury, grand jury, abused countless times to target political speech. I have nothing to contribute to this case, and I resent being forced to endanger myself by participating in this predatory practice. So she says, I won't appear before the jury. Not appearing before the jury obviously has legal consequences, which is both imprisonment and fine. And she is sent back again to prison. And from her testimony, you get the sense that when she's sent back into prison, she's begun the process of transitioning from male to female. And again, I'll just read out to you what she says. Only a few months before re-incarceration, I received gender confirmation surgery. This left my body vulnerable to injury and infection, leading to possible complications that I'm now seeking treatment for. She goes on to say, I worry about seeing medical professionals with knowledge about post-operative care if complications develop, which I have reason to think has already happened. I worry about regular access to daily hormones, Unfortunately, despite assurances by the jail and the US Marshal Service, such efforts normally come slower and are very limited. I requested outside professionals at my own expense over 3 weeks ago. Despite this, I remain unseen by professionals competent to treat me. Every passing day further complicates my medical care and health, exposing me to permanent, intractable complications. Again, the question then is, if all these are the problems, surely she knew the problems that she'll face. Why did she go ahead against the US military? And again, the answer really lies in the fact that, again, it's a very, very powerful notion where to her, being trans is very, very important. But equally important is what you'd call her strong moral compass. I read to you again what she says. She says, each person must make the world we want to live in around us where we stand. I believe in due process, freedom of the press, and a transparent court system. I object to the use of grand juries as tools to tear apart vulnerable communities. I object to this grand jury in particular and as an effort to frighten journalists and publishers who serve a critical public good. I have had these values since I was a child, and I've had years to confinement to reflect on them. For much of the time, I depended for survival on my values, my decision, and my conscience. I will not abandon them now. So I just want to end with that note just to make the point that sometimes where we get a sense of hope and inspiration is from the lives of individual people. We get a sense of what the notion of politics itself might mean. What Chelsea Manning's story tells us is that we can move beyond what you'd call a single issue politics. That to be trans or to have an imagination of trans politics can be a way of engaging with the world at large. Again, the idea here is there among people a love of the world? What do you mean by love of the world? Which means that do you engage with the wider issues in the world which matter to you? That gets back again, I'll end with this, it gets back to Professor Matthew's beginning question, that is it possible to fight for a trans politics without fighting fascism or without fighting authoritarianism? I don't think the answer is self-evident, but I think the answer is something which will emerge in the process of a certain kind of a struggle. If there are people who believe that our issues are interlinked, that you can't delink a trans politics from a queer politics from the fight for a more just or a more free world, then it is the question of how we get together and build or cultivate that form of politics which believes that until every person is free, no person is free. And we have to fight to cultivate that form of politics. And I think that's a task really which we set ourselves as far as the future is concerned. I'll end with that. Thank you.